It turns out that the work, at least so far, would say that the most sensitive algorithm that you can know about to determine your longevity is your immune age. Your immune age is more important than any other organ age in determining your longevity because your immune age is connected to all the other organs and how they're functioning. So I think we have undersold as a population the importance of our immunity as a place that will respond to how we treat it so that we can own it and don't become a victim of it.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter. Today, we're going to be talking about immunity. You know, various topics in health and medicine come and go over the years in terms of being emphasized and being sort of in the center of the spotlight. But right now, I think immunity is in the center of the spotlight, and for good reason. Not just because it's playing such a central role in really keeping us healthy or paving the way for disease, but I think more importantly because we now recognize that there is this intimate connection between our metabolic health and our immune health as well. And that's important because we know that our lifestyle choices are very impactful as it relates to our metabolic health. Therefore, by transitivity, we can affect the functionality of our immune systems by making better lifestyle choices. And I don't think there's anyone we could have on the program better to talk about this information than Dr. Jeffrey Bland. As I have said many times in the past, Dr. Bland has been one of the most important teachers for me for the past 3 decades. Let me tell you a little bit more about Dr. Jeffrey Bland. Jeff Bland, PhD, has had a career in health that spanned more than 40 years. He is a nutritional biochemist by training, and he began working in academia as a university professor. He then spent 3 decades in the natural products industry working alongside other pioneers, and he's a lifetime educator. Jeff has traveled, as he lets us know many times, around the world many times in his role as the father of functional medicine. In 1991, he and his wife Susan founded the Institute for Functional Medicine, and in 2012, Jeff founded another educational nonprofit called the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute, or PLMI. He's the author of The Disease Delusion, Conquering the Causes of Chronic Illness for a Healthier, Longer, and Happier Life, as well as countless additional books and multiple research papers. Most recently, Dr. Bland has founded a new company called Big Bold Health, which is on a mission to transform the way people think about one of nature's greatest innovations, the immune system. Through Big Bold Health, Jeff is advocating for the power of immunorejuvenation, a concept that we'll talk about today, to enhance immunity at a global level, often through the rediscovery of ancient food crops and superfoods. To get there, Jeff is building a network of small farms and suppliers throughout the United States that take a clear stance on regenerative agriculture, environmental stewardship, and planetary health. I'm really honored and excited to welcome Dr. Bland to our program. Well, Jeffrey Bland, it's so good to see you.
Dr. David Perlmutter, what a treat this is. Absolutely. It's like the great celebration. You know, I'm having my birthday tomorrow. So this is like the greatest birthday present I could think of.
Well, that's a bit of an honor. We call each other doctor, I guess, when we're in public to be formal. But we've been at this for quite some time, and I've watched your amazing evolution over time in the areas that you dedicate your interest to. And more recently, recent years, it's really been on the function of the immune system. And I think you've really made it clear to all the rest of us as our mentor that really it all starts with immunity. Whether we're looking at cardiovascular disease, cancer, neurodegenerative conditions, it's all related to the function of the immune system. So how does immunity take the spotlight at this point? How did we get here?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great question. And I think a lot of people probably got there before I did, but I maybe finally kind of put this together. It started with me really asking the question about function. As you know, I've been hanging out with this concept of function for quite a few decades now. And when I started to distill down what I learned to this level in my life, I learned that function, the gateway to function, is how our body interacts with the outside and inside world. And so then I started asking the question, well, where does this communication start, and how does it participate in the regulation of our phenotype, of how we look, act, and feel? And when I did that, I came to the not too startling conclusion that there are really two systems of the body that are interacting 24/7, 365 with the outside world. One is in your bailiwick, you're the expert, nervous system, and the other is in the immune system, and they're tied together inextricably. So it's the neuroimmune or immunoneural, however you want to prioritize them. But the immune system, to me, was very interesting because I'd always kind of compartmentalize it to think about it, the defensive system against infectious disorders and infectious organisms. But when you really think about what we now know about the immune system, it is a signaling system that translates information from the outside world into all sorts of regulatory functions at every organ level in our body. There's immune systems in our brain, muscles, spleen, pancreas, liver, heart. I mean, we all have muscles, I think I mentioned. So when we start thinking about the immune system, it has this dynamic personality because it turns over about every 90 to 120 days. Every 3 to 4 months, the cells that make up our immune system get replaced with new cells. Now, the question is, are they the same, better than, or worse than the ones that we're replacing? And we can't say the same thing with a lot of other post-mitotic cells. Like you don't have your muscle cells turning over every 90 days. You can cause them to be hypertrophied, but where they can get larger or smaller, but you can't, this dynamic change in the actual cell itself is not nearly as significant as you find in the immune system. So the immune system then came to recognize is this very dynamic responder to where we are and how we're communicating with the outside world. And the outside world includes things inside our outside world, like the microbiome, which then participates with the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, which is our embedded gut immune system. And all of this is one super system that's cross-talking to the nervous system, and also then having collateral bystander conversations with the endocrine system. So now we have a gateway through the immune system to many, many other functions that cut across different ICD codes. And so when I got thinking about that in greater detail, I said, well, what do we know about how the immune system renews itself or regenerates itself or rejuvenates itself? What do we know? And as I started to dig into that more detail, I found out that there are all sorts of people out there in the world that have been asking this question and studying it for some period of time. I maybe was a little late to the party, but there was an extraordinary explosion going on in the field of immunology to look at systems immunology, and that this concept of systems immunology was the darling of the dance right now. And I should really come up to speed with that, because maybe if we learned how to harness systems immunology, we could affect many, many different functions in the body that we're now thinking as isolated into different organs. So that led me then into recognizing, when you start thinking of systems immunology, that the system of our immune complex, both our innate and adaptive and T lymphocyte messaging systems, are really tied into a global immune system. And here's what was really my aha. And you've spoken to this for decades that I've had the privilege of knowing you, about the interconnection between things that might not appear to be directly related to, in this case, the nervous system, but have indirect but very salient and important relationships to how our nervous system functions. And the same thing holds true with the immune system. And so the planet has an immune system: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus cycles, energy cycles, hydrological cycles. Those are all related to the integrity of the immune system, ability to be resilient against change, which is what the immune system does. It protects us as a resilient system against change, as does the nervous system, by the way, as well. And then the planet immune system, I find, is connected to the microbial immune system of the soil. So the soil has an immune system that's related to the microbes, the mycorrhiza that are living in our soil. It's a living, breathing organism unto itself that has its own immune system. And that immune system, it turns out, communicates directly with the genetics of our seeds as they germinate to make plants. And therefore, the plant has an immune system that is very similar, actually, in the innate immune system of plants to that of the human system. It doesn't have the circulating macrophages and neutrophils, but it has a whole chemical messaging system that looks very similar to our cellular immune system in our body. And that is coupled together with the soil mycorrhiza and how the immune system of the soil is working. So now the immune system of the plant then influences the final products that it produces in its fruiting bodies, its seeds that have to carry that information on. And we as human beings depend upon the seeds of plants for the majority of our nutrition, either directly or indirectly. We either feed the seeds to something else than we eat, or the seeds are eaten directly. And those factors that are incorporated within those seeds, those immune factors, then influence the immune system of those individuals that consume those seeds. So that could be if you feed a lot of corn to cattle, then you get whatever that information was with the corn's immune system. And if it was, Roundup Ready corn and it had been treated with NPK fertilizers, you're going to have a different set of immune system characteristics in that corn than wild corn of maize that came through our Central American ancestors. And that's going to signal to those that eat it a different message to their immune system. And so when I started looking at that in this kind of more global state, I thought, oh my word, there's a lot to learn, but there's also a lot to leverage out of this. Because if we can learn how to take that information and translate it into a system, in systems immunity, we might be able to fight back against so many of these chronic illnesses that we say are inflammatory in nature. I mean, what is inflammatory? Inflammatory is the immune system not at rest. It's under hyperresilience. It's saying I have to do battle against a presumed foreigner or invader. And so inflammation is really an imbalanced immune system. And the imbalanced immune system is related to this whole super system that I'm just describing, which, by the way, is all executable in terms of how we respond to it if we ask the right questions.
Influenceable. The broad scope that you just described is the kind of stuff that goes through your mind, my mind anyway, just before I fall asleep. When you grasp, I guess this is what happens when people take psychedelics or something. You grasp the interrelatedness of all that is around us, that the organisms in the soil are influencing the plants that we eat, that then influence our genetic expression, for crying out loud, that i.e. the plant organisms are influencing our life code. We embrace the notion that our own personal gut-related microbiome is sending signals that moment to moment is epigenetically changing our DNA expression. And I guess you can get your arms around that, but to take it 2 or 3 orders away from us to the plant microbiome affecting the plant and its seeds, its progeny that we then consume, you brought something up, I think, that's really worth talking about. And that is when we disturb the organisms in the soil, which we do by using glyphosate, how does that then manifest in terms of what's going on then in the plants that then inform our bodies, as you call our attention to food as information? What is that information signal we're getting based upon the alteration of the influence of the soil microbiome when it's been so radically changed through this damaging of the shikimate pathway via glyphosate? What happens to that? It seems to me that this is potentially throwing a major monkey wrench into our physiology and our chances for being healthy.
Well, I think you're hitting on, to me, one of the major ahas that has come about through application of some of this basic science that's occurring now, where this cross-functional science, it looks at genetics, it looks at agronomy, it looks at soil architecture, so soil science, it looks at gene expression patterns in developing plants. All of that is starting to come together in kind of this collaborative new science that is not so myopic, it's not so siloed, and it starts to see these interconnections. That's why I was talking about systems immunology, because there are immunologists that are experts in one cell type within the immune system, and they may not see how that connects into all these other broader array. Let me give you an example. that I think illustrates this in my learning. So when we got involved with this ancient food, Tartary buckwheat, which is a 4,000-year-old food product that was lost in America a couple hundred years ago, and we were very interested in it because it has a very rich body of history, both going all the way back to the Yellow Emperor's Handbook in China, but more recently in modern science, looking at the remarkable portfolio of immune active nutrients that are in this plant. It has over 150 different immune active phytochemicals, plant-derived substances. And so we got very interested in it because it had been lost in America. And I was wondering, well, why is it so popular in, say, Asian countries, but we don't have it in the United States? And why? What's the advantage of it? That ultimately led us into actually starting to grow a small amount of it with a farmer, former ag research professor from Cornell, Sam Beer, up in Angelica, New York. And when we started to do that, we found out that the yield and actually the composition of the phytochemicals in the seed when we harvest it were very dependent upon the weather patterns and the way that the different parts of the farm were both hydrated and were husbanded. So we got wondering, could we alter the actual way that product or that plant produced those immune active chemicals, those phytonutrients, if we were to do something to standardize the health of the soil? Now, I wanted to point out these farms that we started doing this on were organically farmed soils for 20 years, and they were all diehard organic farmers. So we put together this little consortium of farmers. We started to do field trials. Emily Reese, our PhD soil scientist from Cornell, oversaw this work. And we started inoculating, this is 2 years ago, different parts of the fields with different mycorrhiza to see if we could, upon harvesting the final plant, alter the phytochemicals, the immune strengthening nutrients in the same seed based upon the health of the soil. Now, recall, this was pretty healthy soil to begin with because this was all being organically farmed for quite a while.
Whatever that means, though, right? I mean, we say organically farmed, that's open to discussion, right?
That's exactly right. So that's why this group of farmers has now moved to ROC certification to go to regenerative farming. So what we found was, of the different field plots that we tested with these different mixtures of microbes that were facultative organisms for soil health, we found that there was one combination that increased the phytochemicals by 25%. Same seed in a soil that was now nourished with, we inoculated with these friendly bugs, and now that healthy immune system of the soil produced a healthier immune system of the plant, which when you ate that seed gave you higher levels. It was like getting super nutrition. So now we start to recognize, as you said, that our whole view of agriculture and its connection into health needs to go back to a systems approach, because we still look at this as a yield-based thing. Just like in medicine, it's all about treating a disease. It's not about productive lifestyles. It's not about health span. It's about treating a disease. That's our particular medical interventional mentality. In farming, it's the same thing. It's all based on yield. We don't really care how you got there, just so you can get more pounds in a bushel. That's what we're really talking about, or more bushels per acre.
Overfed and undernourished.
That's right. Exactly right. And that's what we have found now with this Himalayan Tartary buckwheat, is that if you steward the soil correctly and you improve the immune system of the soil, you improve the immune system of the plant, you improve the quality of the product for the human. It's a really powerful example.
Well, let's break down the what then is created in the HTB, the Himalayan Tartary buckwheat, that has such salubrious benefits for us as humans. We can talk about polyphenols, but are there as well, phytoalexins that you're looking at? What else is going on in the HTB?
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's a really important point that probably we as consuming public don't take into full account, that when we eat food, as you mentioned earlier, we're eating information. And then the question is, what is that information? Is it monotonic information that's yelling at us? Like sugar is information, sucrose molecule, all by itself. Pure white sucrose molecules is information, but it's shouting at us.
So it's saying that winter is coming, make fat. raise your blood sugar, raise your blood
Exactly.
pressure. It's a wonderful environmental signal.
That's right. So now let's go to what we had learned from the traditional Hawaiians when they started growing sugarcane, and they were eating sugarcane, not white sugar, but the kids grew up on sugarcane juice. Now, did they have the same dental caries as the individuals who were tending those, who were the Caucasians that had come in from Europe to run those sugar plantations, who were eating cane sugar? Did they have the same caries rate? The answer is no. They had 3 times the caries rate, the people that were eating the raw sugar, versus the same amount of sugar that was consumed as sugarcane juice. Now, why would that be? Because there are all these other substances that are sending parts of the information to our body that collects the information in an orchestration, not just the first violin, but the strings and the woodwinds, the brass and the percussion all playing together so that the symphony is regulating one's function in a way that leads to health, not just one voice shouting. No matter how good that voice is, it's not the same orchestra. So when we look at the connection of that kind of analogy to our present food supply system, we think we can deconstruct food and then reconstruct it by adding back some stuff. We call that fortified.
Right. Enriched.
Yes, and that's a facetious concept. It's not true. It's depleted, and its messaging is an entirely different. And you've done such a beautiful job with this whole way that you've helped people to understand that the personality of food can really influence us across multiple functions. And I really liked drop acid because it brings metabolism into perspective with regard to one important biomarker that really relates to so many different functional aspects and attributes. If you eat a complete diet that is balanced properly, the orchestration that regulates those metabolic functions, as seen as the cinders that become uric acid, is very different than if you eat a highly processed diet. You said it beautifully in your book, and how you get away from gout.
Well, I think if we take a soundbite for this podcast to promote it, it's going to be you saying, "I like drop acid." It'll end up being very popular. So we have this product now that you've made available. You've become a farmer in your later years, and this is one of the largest types of farming experiences to grow this by uniting all these small farms. Or how did that come about?
Yeah, so life is filled with the serendipities, and I think you probably in the same situation I'm in right now. Tomorrow's my 78th birthday, and I look back and I say, how did 78 years slip by? I mean,
I hear you.
It's just unbelievable. And what I recognize is that I'm having now, particularly the last 2 years, an incredible number of serendipitous experiences where I'm running into people that are, connecting something from my past experiences in life in ways that I say, what's the probability of that happening? For instance, I was in St. Martin last week. I ran into this guy just by chance when I was going diving, and we got into a talk. It turned out that he was a couple of years older than I am, 3 years older than I am, and he was from Laguna Hills, California. I said, oh, I know that area. I grew up down in that area. I went to the University of California at Irvine. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Well, it quickly then collapses into him saying that he went to the same high school I went to, and he played basketball on the same team and was coached by the same coach I was coached by. He was just a few years ahead. When I was a freshman, he was a senior. So I took his position on the basketball team as he left and graduated. I mean, so these are the kind of things that are happening to me all the time. I mean, you say, what's the probability? Well, one of those things relates to your question about Tartary buckwheat. I had 3 serendipitous things happen all within a 2-month period that I think guided me in a way that I would have never anticipated. Number one, I read an article in the Journal of Clinical Investigation that was talking about this new way of treating blood pressure, hypertension, by treating the immune system so that it speaks differently to the vascular endothelium and causes it to relax through the immune system. And the compound that they were studying that causes that effect on the immune system was called 2-hydroxybenzylamine. 2-hydroxybenzylamine, when I read the fine print in the paper, it turns out it says this is found in only one food, Himalayan Tartary buckwheat, or I think it said Tartary buckwheat. I said, well, what is tartary buckwheat? I never even heard of tartary buckwheat. I know about common buckwheat, esculatum, but I didn't know about tataricum. So I started doing some work on that, and I asked then my colleague, Trish Ury, who's been working with me now for 26 years. Hard to believe she's that tolerant. She's definitely a tolerant person.
Trooper.
Yeah, absolutely. So I said to Trish, Trish, do you know anything about this tartary buckwheat? And she says, no, I never heard about it. I said, well, I'm going to China. I've been invited to give this lecture at Harbin up in the northern region of China to the China Health Centers, 10,000 Chinese docs that meet every year to talk about things related to primary care in China. I'm going to talk about functional medicine to these docs. And while I'm gone, do you think you could see what is going on with this tartary buckwheat? And she said, sure, I'll look into it. So I left. I went to China. I had a host there who was Shanghaiese trained medical doctor, but he was a PhD trained at Johns Hopkins in the United States in clinical chemistry. And so we had this wonderful time together, and then we were to fly back to Shanghai, but there was a typhoon. So he said, Jeff, we could go back to Shanghai from Harbin, which would take us all the way across China, 2,600 miles, on the bullet train if you're interested. It goes about 250 miles an hour. So it would, take about 12 hours or something like that. Are you interested in doing that? I said, wow. Now that would be a real treat to go right through the center of China and see the whole of China in one day. So lo and behold, we get on the bullet train. We started going across. We're in the middle of China. All these agricultural fields are going by at 200 plus miles an hour. And so I said, so Joe, I'm going to ask a wild card question. Have you ever heard of Himalayan Tartary Buckwheat? Well, it was as if time stopped and the train stopped and time was frozen. And he looks at me as these big eyes. He says, you got to be kidding me. I said, no, I wondered, have you ever heard about this? He said, Jeff, I represent the largest research group in Wuhan on Himalayan Tartary Buckwheat. We've been looking for someone in the United States that would understand the chemistry and so forth to collaborate with. So when I got home then from this trip, Trish says, I can find only one grower of Tartary Buckwheat in the United States. That's this Sam Beer, this former professor of ag research at Cornell. He has a small hobby farm in Angelica. So now we own Angelica Mills. Now we connected the farm together with Vanderbilt, with China. And now we have this consortium that is exploring Himalayan Tartary Buckwheat, trying to bring it back into the American food supply system as the immune strengthening crop. So that's a little bit of history of serendipity.
I never forget the story that Alessio Fasano talked about, using that term serendipity as in terms of his discovery of alpha gliadin and gut permeability, and and I always think of Louis Pasteur's quote that chance favors the prepared mind. So I think if you're open and you're actively seeking, that these things end up landing in your lap, right?
I absolutely agree, and I think we hang out as we collect. As we grow older, experiences, and we collect certain kinds of affinities and affiliations. And so I think it's more likely we're going to have some of these chance observations when we collect certain things around us. And we continue to nurture them.
So one of the things that we've learned about this HTB is it's high in polyphenols. And that's good for us because, there's some discussion as to whether polyphenols actually act in their own rights as antioxidant, or do they challenge mitochondrial function, and therefore mitochondrial antioxidant functionality is increased by the production of other antioxidants. Be that as it may, we know that polyphenols actually change functionality of the gut microbiome as well. Let's just agree, obviously, that polyphenol-rich foods are a good thing to be taking in, that this HTB is rich in polyphenols. And how does that play into its health properties?
Yeah, thank you. So I want to take up what you just said, because it's that you said something that's really quite important. It's really at the cutting edge of our understanding of some of this food science discovery as it relates to immune function. So as you very well articulated, the historical view of polyphenols in the diet is they serve as antioxidants in some cellular mechanisms. And then there is further differentiation as to maybe they have these mitochondrial mitophagy effects and influence through different kinds of cell signaling pathways, the bioenergetics of cells that is incorporated within mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation. But there is another mechanism that I think is emerging, which I'm really excited about, and I think we're at the forefront in our research group in adding to this body of knowledge, and that is these are epigenetic regulators. These particular molecules have the ability to influence specific enzymes and their functions that are involved with epigenetic regulation, some of which relate to the Yamanaka factors, these factors that are associated with aging of cells. And so we now recognize that the signaling of these portfolio of different phytochemicals, these different polyphenols in plants, can regulate the way genes are expressed by way of epigenetic remodeling. And this is particularly important for cells that are turning over more rapidly, like mucosal cells, microbiomal cells in our gut, and immune cells, all of which are turning over and picking up information that is translated to their epigenetic remodeling as to how those genes will be expressed in those cells and what will they look like in terms of their phenotype. So this study that we just concluded, that was actually orchestrated by, I'm very proud and happy to say, your son, Dr. Austin Perlmutter. Austin oversaw our first clinicaltrials.gov registered trial, in which the results are just now in after a couple of years of working on this, in which we found in 50 individuals that those individuals who consume the matrix of these polyphenols found in Himalayan Tartary Buckwheat, who started off with an aged immune system, and we can measure that looking at the epigenetic age using various age algorithms, that after 90 days of supplementation, lo and behold, it lowered their immune age by 47%. 47% reduction in their epigenetic immune age in 90 days by giving the signals of these right constellation of phytochemicals. So this, to me, is the interface between food as medicine. You know, I've always said for years, I'll close by saying that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has two doors. It has a door that is food and it has a door that is drug. But now we're starting to see maybe get hit in the door jam on the way in, because food and drug may in fact lose some of their differentiation when we talk about mechanisms of action and how foods have the physiological principles incorporated within them to modulate the same pathways that drugs do in ways that are hormetic and ways that produce balance and functional resilience versus just grabbing onto physiology and wrestling it to the ground, which is what high affinity drugs do.
You know, the hormesis part of the story I think is really interesting, because I think we're transitioning, and this gets back to the polyphenol mitochondrial discussion. We're transitioning to a place of really recognizing the value on an organelle level of hormesis, of a little bit of mitochondrial stress might be actually a good thing. A little bit of downregulation of complex 1 we know might be a good thing in terms of, you know, the downstream manifestations of that, you know, there are drugs, as you mentioned, that actually work via downregulating complex 1 of oxidative phosphorylation. But that said, you did mention a couple things I think are interesting, and that is I think you were insinuating transitioning to senescent cells that have adopted a phenotype whereby they are now secreting a variety of chemicals that are influencing negatively the cells that surround them, adopting this SASP phenotype, if you will. And it seems to me that what you're saying is that HTB may have a role to play in either reprogramming those cells or moving them along to allowing them to undergo apoptosis. So which is it, and how does that, what are the mechanisms involved there?
Yeah, thank you. So, senescence associated secretory phenotype, right? SASP, as you were talking about. So I go back to the blue zones. If you study the blue zones, which Dan Buettner and I have been in conversation, I know you have as well with Dan, remarkable guy. I asked him the question, if you look at the dietary factors that are associated with these blue zone regions of the world that he studied, what is the commonality? Because these are varied in the foods that these people are eating. I mean, one of those blue zones is Loma Linda, California. And so Loma Linda, California is certainly very different than what people eat in Vilcabamba or people in Costa Rica or some of these other blue zone regions. And we did a dietary review. I'm going to publish this, of looking at dietary principles that are common among these different foods in different cultures that are associated with the blue zones, the long-lived cultures. And the thing that comes popping out of that data analysis is polyphenols. They are the one singular factor. Protein's different, amino acids different, fatty acids different, gluten versus non-gluten different. What's the same is the concentration, the abundance of polyphenols in the diets across the blue zones. So when we start asking the question of, well, why do plants have polyphenols? I mean, they go to all this trouble to do their metabolic work to make them. Do they just have nothing better to do with their time than to make polyphenols? No, they represent the plant's immune systems. That's what they are. They're the defensive components of plants. They prevent plants from being sunburned. They prevent plants from being infected with mold and yeast. They prevent plants from being eaten by bugs, because bugs don't like the flavor. And so when you start looking at defensive substances, which is the immune system of the plant, to make it more resilient, we eat that resilience. And so this construct of how does that translate? What's the if you think about the communication cycle, the communication cycle is transferred through this process of signal transduction that comes through the epigenetic remodeling of cells. And these polyphenols are bringing that information into reconstructing not our genes. Our genes stay the same, but how genes are going to be expressed based upon their epigenetic signaling through the methylome and phosphorylation and other mechanisms. And when we start looking at the methylome, we can actually see something like, in our study with Himalayan Tartary Buckwheat in apparently healthy people, we found that something on the order of 30% of their genes were modulated in the epigenetic remodeling by consuming 90 days of our Himalayan Tartary Buckwheat concentrate. So we're really, when I used to say food is information, it's not just soft information, it's hard information. It's actually remodeling the structural function of our body in ways that make us different than we were before. And hopefully it makes us better.
It seems that plants are most vulnerable when the seed sprouts. That's their period of highest vulnerability in terms of being eaten, in terms of being finally exposed to a different set of environmental influences. And so it is that their levels of these protective chemicals seems to be at its highest during sprouting. So how did that play into your HTB story?
Oh, well, thank you for asking that. So again, following the literature, it turns out that there is a very robust body of literature, mostly going on in Eastern Europe and Asia, on Himalayan Tartary Buckwheat. By the way, there are 35 different cultivars that are known of Tartary Buckwheat. Tartary comes from the Tartan region of China up against the Himalayas. Himalayan Tartary Buckwheat is one of those varietals that has the highest level of these polyphenols. And it turns out that that particular plant, when it sprouts, just as you suggested, increases the level of polyphenols by about threefold in that first 4 days of sprouting. So we got involved with some sprouting studies and started sprouting at different days, looking at where you maximize in the sprouts the protection of these polyphenols against the integrity of the plant. And it turned out with certain kinds of, again, it's light dependent. So you have to have the right kind of solar spectrum. We find the 450 nanometers is the best spectrum that then activates within 4 days in a neutral pH in a sterile situation. The sprouts to have threefold the level of phytochemicals as they would have in the flower itself, meaning you can form a superfood by appropriate sprouting. So now we're on to Himalayan Tartary Buckwheat sprouts. We're the first people in the world to produce organic sprouts, start looking at its effects and how it can be added into recipes, menus, food plans, because 2 teaspoons of the sprout powder are equivalent to a half a cup of the flour in terms of immune active nutrients. So we're trying to make this as user-friendly as possible to get this value proposition into people's daily diets.
To be fair, I have in front of me 3 pages of questions. I haven't even gotten to one of them yet.
Well, that's for you and me. That's how it always goes with us. Come on.
Yeah, but this whole notion of food as information that we could take, that could be such a couple hours of conversation. The fact that it's just one simple part of this incredible relationship, that everything is talking to everything else. And, frankly, it's worked for a couple billion years. It's worked. And when we see what's happening now, as that system has been corrupted, due to, I think, the evolution of the human brain ultimately, and the creation of agriculture, et cetera, and let's call it degradation of the quality and information content of our foods, we're seeing what's happening to human health around the world. And I think that what you're offering up is I hate to call it a hack, but a fix, a way of regaining contact with this information or source and reestablishing balance in the immune system. I think, people talk about, well, I want to have a strong immune system. It's really more, I think, about balance. And I think in your opening comments, you said that we've really been myopic in our understanding of the immune system being how we face pathogenic insults in our lifetimes. And in medical school, of course, and training, that's what we learned. That was our defense against the various insults, to this day. Well, we need a robust immune system in case we're exposed to COVID or a virus or who knows what. But the notion that it's involved in nurturing every tissue in the body, certainly as it relates to what's going on in the brain, my perspective, focusing on this immune cell, the microglial cell, and that, a sidelight it's sure responsive to the invasion of bacterial components or viruses. Of course, that's what it does. It's an immune cell. But the idea that it's nurturing neurons, it's clearing the brain of beta amyloid, that it is regulating its own metabolism based upon the conditions in which it sees itself, and then observing this relationship between metabolic function in general and the capacity of those immune cells, microglia, to do their job, I think really opens the door for us to realize that we can absolutely influence what's going on with that part of our immune system by regulating our metabolism. This immunometabolism is a factor over which we have control. And I think you've made it clear that we all expect changes in our adaptive immune system by definition to happen. But I think you've been discussing lately the notion that we can change the functionality of our innate, or this sort of deeply held endogenous immune system as well. And that's kind of a bit of an iconoclastic position to take.
Yeah, I think you said so much in that stream of consciousness, David. That was brilliant, because I believe that what we are starting to recognize is that this interconnection of our immune system to all these different organ functions relates to how the body really works. It works symphonically by all the parts of the body playing, hopefully, in harmony together. And we start to see this a little bit with regard to the feedback we've been getting from our studies with tartary buckwheat, in which people are saying, oh, I'm sleeping better. I'm thinking more clearly. My energy is better. Oh, my chronic joint pain's going away. Oh, I seem to digest my food. I'm more tolerant to my diet. Now, how does all that happen? Almost sounds like a panacea. It happens because if the immune system gets aligned, our resilience and our capacity to manage change across all these organs is enhanced. It's increased. And in this day and age where we are constantly confronted with change, it's the one principle that we know is present. We better have really high capability of accommodating change with resilience. And that's what our immune system is there to do, is to buffer those things so we don't have to worry about them and to manage it silently. And the more resilience we have, which is tied to, as you said, the functions at the first and second level of immune defense, the first level being this innate, what used to be called primitive immune system, that you couldn't teach it anything. It was just there. Now we're saying, no, it's teachable. The innate immune system, this first line of defense, is really very, very important as the first barrier that our body will then utilize to accommodate things that might want to take us over or cause change. And this is probably one of the reasons, quite honestly, why we were so poor as a country in responding to SARS-CoV-2. Of all the developed countries in the world, it appears our outcome was not just because we were older. We weren't older than many of these countries. We just were less able to be resilient in our innate immune systems. That was the first line of defense. And it kind of didn't do the job for us as effectively as other places around the world. And so the construct that we can retrain the first and second line of our defense, particularly this innate immune system, which resides, by the way, as you'd expect, mostly on the barrier tissues that are exposed to the outside world. So the innate immune system is very rich in the gut mucosa. It's very rich in the lungs and the pulmonary system, the exact places where SARS-CoV-2 infected, by the way. And those are the areas where we have tremendous plasticity if we do the right things in our life. We call it immunorejuvenation. That's the term that we put to it. And this whole concept that we can rejuvenate, we can reboot, we can reframe our immune system's function at whatever our chronological age to be more resilient. And that's what leads to healthy, long health spans. And in fact, I'll give one little factoid. Now that we have all these biological age determinants, these new algorithms, it turns out that the work, at least so far, would say that the most sensitive algorithm that you can know about to determine your longevity is your immune age. Your immune age is more important, apparently, than any other organ age in determining your longevity, because your immune age is connected to all the other organs and how they're functioning. So I think we have undersold as a population the importance of our immunity as a place that will respond to how we treat it so that we can own it and don't become a victim of it.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that we tend to silo these terms, and it's very myopic. It makes us myopic moving forward when we look at the term immunity, immune function, immunity. I mean, it connotes, as we talked about earlier, our ability to defend ourselves against pathogens. And once we adopt that understanding of a term, we're kind of locked in, like testosterone being end of story male hormone. Cholecystokinin only deals with the gallbladder, et cetera. Progesterone for gestation. And so it is with immunity. I mean, immunity deals with maintenance of tissues, functionality of tissues, regulation of metabolism, sure, inflammatory response, but clearing of cellular debris. I mean, was that in the book? No, I don't remember that chapter. It really wasn't. And I find it interesting there's this term immunometabolism that you have absolutely popularized. And I think when we get together in November, that's the central theme. And what is this intersection between the immune system and our metabolic function? Okay, let's explore what that is. And once we explore it and get it unpacked a bit, we realize that this is a powerful inroad for us, yes, to improve our metabolic health, but at the same time improve our balance of our immunological function, and that has wide-reaching implications in terms of total body health. As back to the brain, it's clear that there are receptors on these immune cells that respond to beta amyloid and phosphorylated tau, those chemicals, misfolded proteins rather, that accumulate in the brain that are associated with neurodegeneration, things like Alzheimer's, of course. But where these bind on the cell surface of these immune cells, the microglial cells, are receptors called RAGE receptors. And they're not called RAGE receptors because it makes the cell into a rage, although maybe it does, but it's the receptor for the advanced glycosylated end product. And that's important because that's a receptor that is responsive to the situation in which blood sugar has been elevated over a period of time, i.e., a metabolic derangement. The very same receptor on this immune cell is responsive to these accumulated misfolded proteins as it is to a marker of metabolic dysfunction. And to me, that connects an awful lot of dots. I mean, it really expands our appreciation of what is going on in the, and I've got to put it in quotes, so-called immune system, far beyond our primitive myopic understanding of, that B cells do this and T cells do that. Man, this is really quite central to the interconnectedness of the entire body. And I want to say one other thing. The notion of the gut-brain connection. I mean, people say, "Have you heard of this? That the gut and the brain are connected?" Or, as Candace Pert made us aware of this psychoneuroimmunology. But there's no, everything is connected. Everything is connected. Everything else, get over it. We've got to stop this, notion of, again, your term, siloing the various systems and functionality of the body, and recognize that everything has to be responsive to everything else going on in the body. That's continuity. And that is the integration of the whole that allows us to survive. That's been honed for as long as there have been living beings on the planet. So, we've got to get out of the way of that. And so much of what we do, getting back to our conversation about the quality of our foods, the glyphosate on the soil, so much that we do is also information. In this case, negative information, and that's offering us up a misguided blueprint for ill health. So what you've done here by creating or making available this product, rediscovering this product that was originally described by the Neijing in the 4th century BC, is really, really powerful. So, I want to just encourage people watching us get into the weeds today, that this is some very powerful stuff out there. And really, over the close to 30 years that I've known you, this is the most exciting thing I've ever seen you come up with.
Well, thank you. I want to give a moment of homage to Bruce McEwen. Bruce McEwen from Rochester, I think in his lifetime published more than 700 research papers. He is the father of what Candace Pert talked about. He had Robert Sapolsky as his postdoc. I mean, the lineage of people that worked in his lab. And what did he discover? He discovered immunometabolism. And Bruce McEwen is known for the term allostasis. But if you dig into allostasis more deeply, what you will see is he was a cross-disciplinary thinker that was second to none in all of the body of the science of what we now call functional medicine. And he has not gotten the credit that he really deserves in our field, because the lineage, the tributaries or the neurons, the dendrites that come out of the McEwen work cuts across every discipline. He, if you look at his body of work, he was the first person to start looking at the relationship between the immune system and insulin resistance, and how metabolic syndrome ties itself together with immunological dysfunctions, and how that ties to things like polycystic ovary syndrome in women and androgen imbalances. And so the whole construct of how we see the body as a web, as a network, was really born out of Bruce McEwen's extraordinary work. I mean, in his lab, Jeff Friedman discovered leptin. And, one of the now things that we recognize as one of these enteroendocrine hormones that regulates obesity and appetite. It touched on GLP-1, it touched on ghrelin, it touched on GIP, all the things that we now consider new. Were in his body of literature going way, way back, when he started. He died at 82, just a couple of years ago. But I think that where we are right now is we have the legacy of all this information, plus 4,000 years of history of what people did to stay healthy prior to the advent of modern medicine. This is now going to Dan Buettner's Blue Zones, and assembling that all into a new architecture, which can empower people to really lead out a century of healthy living, if they just use what's available and construct their own lifestyles in sympathy to it. We don't need to mythologize about what we would like. It already exists. We just need to implement and execute. And you're doing a fantastic job. I want to just once again compliment you as being
well, coming from you, that means a whole heck of a lot. But you've got to wonder, and I'd love to hear your answer to this question that's puzzled me for my whole life. And that is, where did this knowledge come from then, hundreds, thousands of years ago? How did the Yellow Emperor know that Ma Huang would be useful in Parkinson's, that we now understand acts through monoamine oxidase B, influencing MAOB enzyme functionality? Where did the knowledge come from for ginkgo and for Himalayan Tartary buckwheat? my sense is the knowledge is there, and we just uncover it through different entrees and utilize it. And I think that that knowledge exists. Maybe it's the allegory of the cave where we are able to see the light briefly. I don't know, but you've got to wonder again as you're falling asleep at night. Those 5 minutes, where did it come from? And maybe they were just comfortable enough to go with it and not have to see the mechanisms and understand the formulations and the chemical reactions. Maybe they just put their skis down the hill and said, this is what I'm feeling. It is innate, but I think it's right. Who knows?
Well, David Berlinski has a new book called Babel Science that's about intelligent design and this debate that's been going on among different quarters of the world and where knowledge comes from and how it transmits in through what we call the laws of nature. And I think this is a very, very interesting question you're raising. And, where is native intelligence? This gets into the concept of what is instinct in animals. Does instinct really exist? Or are there other kind of superordinate knowledge bases that are patterns that we don't fully understand that go beyond the molecules that tie us up into our genetics?
Well, you just pushed a button in me, and I'll tell you why. Several weeks ago, I was walking in Chile in a garden with some friends, and I came upon a sunflower. And I don't know if you've seen a sunflower when it's fully laden with seeds, but those seeds are in a perfect spiral pattern. And my explanation would be that through trial and error over tens of thousands or years or hundreds of thousands of years, the best pattern for those seeds that would be best for survival of the sunflower plant was to array those seeds in the spiral pattern or the coloration of a bird or all of those nuances of nature that we are led to believe are basically a manifestation of being best adapted to a particular environment. And I said to the woman, Marcela Lobos, I said, I'm far be it for me to challenge Darwinian evolution, but it seems to me another explanation is exactly what you just said, and that is that there's a intelligence being tapped into, and that intelligence can change with time. And her response was that right on the hill where we went walking earlier this morning, Darwin himself spent several months pondering this question, right where we were. Again, what are the chances? And I have to say that as it relates to, you bring up the term instinct. I've been spending a lot of time watching our bird feeder lately and watching what happens with the birds in terms of the so-called pecking order, who gets to eat when, which bird is dominant. And, these are instinctual behaviors. But one wonders, are they more involved in tapping into this level of intelligence than are we as humans who challenge virtually everything that we do or say or interact with? That's part of being human. That and the opposable thumb, great. The opposable thumb, I think, is great. And questioning, of course, is great too. It allows advancement. But it's just interesting that you touched upon that because it's kind of been central to what I'm thinking about these days. And my next book is probably going to be called The Bird Feeder because there's some amazing things going on there in terms of watching animals behave in such a way that we would say it's instinctual, but perhaps are tapping into, a deep set of intelligent programs.
Well, I think the word instinct is a placeholder. It's like when you talk about comorbidities. Comorbidities is just a placeholder word that means you don't really understand what's going on. Instinct is really a placeholder word that just tells you don't know what the hell you're talking about. There is no such thing as instinct. It has to come from a pattern of behavior. And I would ask a question related to your sunflowers. So that was probably a right-handed spiral. What happens if you grow that same seed in the northern hemisphere? Will it be a left-handed spiral?
I'll just have to flush the toilet and get back to you on that
That's
one.
exactly right. So these are the things that are patterns of nature that are built at levels that are beyond that of the molecular configuration of the system.
I left a hanging chad in my mind and I wanted to revisit it. I believe you mentioned something about the influence of HTB emulating or perhaps indicating that Yamanaka factors may have been at play. Or you did mention that term, didn't you?
Yeah. Yes, I did.
And how deep does that go in terms of our understanding of what Yamanaka factors can do?
Yeah, I think that this is really a very interesting part of the story. A lot of the gerontologists, molecular gerontologists, and cellular gerontologists are now really trying to ask, do the Yamanaka factor discoveries really participate throughout a course of life beyond that of fetal development in creating outcome of the longevity of different cell lines in the sentient human being? And if so, can they be modified without, some hard-hitting drug that has some significant adverse effect on the
Or potentially.
architecture? Yeah. And so I think that these are discovery level things, just like autophagy. Autophagy cuts both ways. Autophagy is a tremendous thing for renewing cells, but autophagy can also lead to cellular destruction. So where are these balance points? That's why I think the immune system is such a good lesson for us because, and you said it earlier, the best immune system is the most balanced immune system. It's got this high resilience. It can go either way. It can move to the right. It can move to the left. It can activate or deactivate depending upon the information from the environment. The worst immune system are those that are already pushed over to the edge, one way or the other, either suppressed or activated, so that you boost an activated immune system, you get worse. You don't get better. So the construct of finding balance points is really at the forefront, I think, of where we're all trying to go. And hormesis may be part of the salient point because that's the way we've evolved to speak to our environment is through little things that have big effects over a long time.
Yeah, and I think another issue that is the immune system plays an important role, and of course, regulation is and cuts both ways is apoptosis. Certainly we would like there to be vigorous pro-apoptotic activity as it relates to the immune function dealing with cancer. On the other hand, apoptosis as it relates to neurons and other cells in the central nervous system, not necessarily a good thing. And that is in the purview of one of the what the immune function does, helps to regulate that. And again, getting back to ultimately the effect the role of mitochondrial function, and in the brain, it's metabolism that regulates this immune activity that ultimately, wields the sword of Damocles. Does the cell live or die? So, the relationships are vast, but I want to thank you, and I look forward to seeing you this summer. Before we went on, we were making plans, which is it's going to be very exciting. That's going to be a real exciting time. But thanks for being with us today. This is breathtaking information. I'm not surprised in the least. However, I knew it would be this way, and always good to spend time with you and learn.
Well, thank you, David. I feel the same about you. And, I'd have to say on my 78th transition here, I'm just amazed actually at the way that we can assemble information through the life experience and create some level of meaning in what has been a lot of mystery in our younger years. We trudge through the kind of the grayness of our life trying to figure it out. And I would be presumptuous to say I have it figured out, but I have a lot more understanding of the subtlety that creates who we are and the value proposition of life at today than I did 30 years ago.
It's vast, and it's far be it for us at some point when we start to think, oh, we really have a pretty good understanding of this and that. It isn't going to happen. But what I'm seeing happen is we're really connecting a lot of dots. We're really finding a lot of those pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, that we that are popping in where they need to be and connecting a lot of dots. There's still a lot of stuff out there, but we've come a long way. But I think that the closer we get, or the the further along we get, I think the more I realize how little we really know.
Well,
And
we
that's
have to go
good,
with
because that
we have
keeps
to
us
go with our
interested.
feelings, right? We have to. These kind of communications that we've just shared are the sentient moments that put purpose to our life, and we need to hold on to them very, very tightly because they're really important. They're guideposts.
Well, with that, I'm going to say goodbye. And again, thank you for your time. It's great. I'm looking forward to seeing you this summer, and also in November, and all the best.
Thank you. Best to you as well.
Bye for now.
Bye bye.
Wow. Dr. Bland is always up to amazing, amazing things. And you can see why I look up to him and have looked up to him for decades. He's certainly an important mentor in my life. This is a company called Big Bold Health. And what he was talking about is something called Himalayan Tartary Buckwheat. It's a fascinating product. And again, what a lever to pull as it relates to regaining balance in our immune systems. Thank you for joining me today on The Empowered Neurologist. I will be back soon. Bye for now.